My friends at Easy Cater are workplace catering pros, helping you find food for everything from daily employee meals to staff meetings and special events. Visit easycater.com/leaderassistant to find out more.
Hi, I'm Scot Wisniewski. Today's leadership quote comes from Oprah Winfrey. Don't worry about being successful, but worry toward being significant, and the success will naturally follow.
The Leader Assistant podcast exists to encourage and challenge assistants to become confident, game-changing leader assistants.
Thank you so much for listening all around the world.
Hey friends, thanks for tuning in to episode 110. You can check out the show notes at leaderassistant.com/110. Also, before we jump into today's interview, I wanted to invite you to join us in the Leader Assistant Premium membership, leaderassistant.com/membership. We have ongoing monthly coaching training sessions, and we post the video replay of those sessions in the members-only library, so you can go back and check out all of the different training sessions on a variety of topics like negotiation, resumes, performance reviews, email and calendar management, auditing your executive's calendar, and much, much more. Again, that's leaderassistant.com/membership. Hope you can join us. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to the Leader Assistant Podcast. It's your host, Jeremy Burrows, and I'm speaking with Scot Wisniewski. Scot is the Senior Executive Assistant to the Global Head of Studios at Spotify. Scot, how's it going?
I'm well, Jeremy. Thanks for having me on. It's great to finally connect, and congratulations to you on the success of not only this podcast, but also your book and everything you're doing for the assistant community. It's really fantastic.
Thanks, Scot. I appreciate it. And where are you at in the world?
So I'm currently in central New York in the heart of the Finger Lakes region. So I'm currently staring out onto Skaneateles Lake as we speak. So I'm about 20 miles west of Syracuse to kind of give you more of a geographical standpoint.
Awesome. And how long have you been at Spotify?
So I've been at Spotify just shy of 3 years. I've had 2 roles within the organization. But yeah, it's a great company to work for.
Cool. So why don't you tell us 3 non-work related things about you?
Okay. Let's see. I would say a huge part of my life is fitness. I actually used to be very overweight, close to 400 pounds toward the end of high school. And so I put a huge amount of emphasis on trying to stay active, stay healthy, working out, taking long walks, doing whatever I can. I lost about 120 pounds and I've been able to keep about at least 110 of that off for well over 20 years. So working out and maintaining a healthy, active lifestyle, something that's very important to me. Another thing would be all throughout my life, I've been involved in the performing arts. Theater's been a huge part of my life. I've been performing on stage for a very long time. I actually am a member of a jazz trio that performs around the city, and I've done a couple of one-man cabaret shows that have done very well and have a couple of albums out as well. And I'm a proud member of the Screen Actors Guild and Actors Equity, so performing is a big part of my life. And I would say a third thing would probably be that in my spare time, I also just love to entertain, cook, and travel.
Wow, so that's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll have to share, you'll have to send me a couple of links to your, your music stuff and just, so
Sure.
people can check that out.
Absolutely, yeah. It's available on all major streaming platforms.
Awesome. So if you could give, or if I could give you an extra hour in your day, what would you do with it?
Good question. I think it probably depends on the day. I would probably have to say most days I would probably try to get an extra hour of sleep. I try to get at least 7 to 8 hours sleep a night, but I usually fall short by a good hour or two. I'm not sleep deprived by any means, but I just love to sleep. Another great option would be probably to get a massage. I always tell myself every year, Jeremy, that I'm going to start getting a massage once a month. And I always fall short of it for some reason. So if I had an extra hour, I'd love to go grab a quick massage. It's a great way to kind of decompress, especially in our roles as EAs, and just relax and give us some me time, I should say.
Yeah. So speaking of EAs, how did you end up being an executive assistant?
Wow, how much time do you have? Because this is kind of a long story. I'll try to give you the abridged version, but my degrees are actually in elementary and special education. So I always thought that I would end up being a teacher. And in fact, after I finished my student teaching, when I graduated from college, I did end up teaching for several months at Watkins Glen Elementary School here in upstate New York. So the teacher that I had actually student taught for was pregnant, and she needed to go out on maternity leave. So the school had asked me, since I was about to graduate, would I be willing just to stay on and teach the students and finish out the school year with them, since I had already had a rapport with all of them being their student teachers. So I did that, thoroughly enjoyed it, loved it, but I also always was in love with New York City and had a big, I guess, love affair, you can say, with the city, and would go down often, being in the performing arts, would take either the train down or the bus and stay with family and friends on Long Island, and take the LIRR into Penn and catch as many, Broadway shows as I could, and live theater and jazz and whatever I could soak up for a weekend, and go back to Central New York. And my parents said, you always could move to New York, Scott, as long as you graduate from college. So after I taught for a few months, I was kind of at a crossroads, Jeremy, and I just said, if I don't do this now, if I don't move to New York, the chances of it happening are probably slim to none. So Mom and I went down, we looked at a bunch of apartments, and lo and behold, I found a tiny 375 square foot studio in Gramercy Park, and literally packed up my tiny little U-Haul with my cat and drove down to New York City. And I did not know one person. And I had my first month's rent paid by my parents and my second month's rent paid. And they said, good luck, you're on your own, make it here, I guess. So I literally the next day picked up a copy. I don't know if you've heard of it, but there used to be a publication in the city called The Village Voice. It's since stopped publication, but they had a great help wanted section. And I found a ad for a company by the name of Springer Verlag, which is one of the leading textbook companies for science and mathematics. And they were looking for a receptionist. So that was kind of my first dib into the whole administrative professional role, and ended up getting the job and worked for them from 9 to 5. That still wasn't enough to pay my rent. So in the evening, I had to find another job, and I actually ended up working. I always am cautious when I say this, at a telemarketing office, but we weren't those annoying cold calling telemarketers that bother people. It was actually sales over the phone, and it was calling people that had registered for the opportunity to receive a discounted vacation package to Florida and the Bahamas. So ended up working there at night on the phone, had my day job at Springer Verlag. Ended up doing so well in the sales arena that I ended up about 6 months after taking the job at Springer, quitting and actually just focusing on the sales aspect and working at night for a company called SRP Enterprises, a small private company. That company grew and grew. So eventually the owner said to me, we're opening up satellite offices. I need an assistant to kind of keep things in track for me, to manage my calendar, my agenda, my travel, my expense reports, et cetera. Would you be interested? So I took her on and was with her for many, many years until about 2008. And then the wonderful recession hit. And so people stopped buying luxury purchases per se. So vacations, people were being very cautious. And so then I was at another crossroads, and I was actually at a wedding in New Jersey. And while I was there at the reception, someone at my table was actually speaking to my husband, who's also an executive assistant, and said, hey, your former boss at Revlon is looking for an EA. Do you know anybody? He kind of hit me underneath the table and said, yeah, I do actually. So literally a few days later, I went in, had an interview with Kiki Gregoire, who I credit much of my career to. We're very close to this day. And so kind of then took the jump from a much smaller company into a global organization and had many roles at Revlon. And prior to leaving, was supporting the chief operating of markets for several years before I came to Spotify. So that's a long answer, but it kind of just shows you the trajectory of how it all worked out.
Wow. So what's maybe one thing that shocked you going from the small company to a global organization?
For sure. I mean, definitely the pace, right? I mean, it was much more, I wasn't used to working in such a fast-paced environment. And even now at Spotify, it's even more fast than it was at Revlon, because at tech, everything's just live at the push of a button. But yeah, working at a global company, the pace and the acceleration of how things happen, the processes and procedures was definitely eye-opening, and obviously just made me a better EA in the long run.
Yeah. So let's talk about Spotify for a second. What do you like about Spotify that you haven't experienced in your other roles?
Yeah, the great thing about Spotify, and I know this word is kind of thrown out all the time and used sometimes kind of haphazardly, but it's the culture. I mean, I have to tell you, Jeremy, that the culture at Spotify is truly like any other company that I've ever worked for in the past. They really, really take care of their people. I actually was poached by them on LinkedIn. I wasn't looking to leave Revlon, but I'm always a huge advocate of having a conversation, because you never, ever know where it could lead. So they reached out to me and said they were looking for an executive assistant to support a high-level person within the organization. Would I be willing? And I had a few phone interviews with HR generalists and coordinators in the beginning. And then when they finally brought me in, I remember just sitting at reception waiting for the HR rep to come and greet me and bring me back to the interview room. And people were kind of just walking by and like high-fiving each other with their laptops, and we're in such a good mood. I actually thought that I was being punked. I'm like, this doesn't exist. This can't be, people cannot be this happy to be at work. And I remember just thinking, this is crazy. They purposely have hired these actors to do this. This can't be real. But lo and behold, it's true. I mean, there's so many great positive aspects about the company. I mean, they really take care of their people from not only a benefits perspective, but through growth and development. And there's just an energy at the company that is so palpable. Everyone is really there to help each other out. It's very team oriented. Egos are checked at the door. You know, it's also super exciting just to work for a brand that has such an amazing global reputation. You know, I tell people I work at Spotify, their eyes kind of light up and they're like, oh, wow, tell me about it, because it's not easy to get in. You know, we receive roughly 50 to 60,000 applications per month for our jobs, and we only hire about 400 to 500 people a year. So there's kind of like a saying that it's easier to get into Harvard than to Spotify. And, you know, I had, just to give you an idea, I had 16 interviews before I landed my role. So so that goes to show you that it was a long process, but great news. I had a great job supporting a wonderful executive that I was with for years. It's always easier to look for a job when you have one, right? But yeah, it was an amazing process, and I thoroughly loved working there. It's just an amazing company and organization, and it's just it's all about growth and development, and both personally and professionally. They have an entire department at Spotify called Greenhouse that is specifically just focused on fostering growth and development with their employees. So it's a pretty special place.
So let's Spotify obviously has gotten into the podcast world pretty heavily. Kind of a random question. Have you met Joe Rogan?
I have not. But now that he's exclusive with us, who knows what the future holds. But no, I've not met him.
So in your professional opinion, speaking more of podcasts, what makes a great podcast?
Good question. I think that, it depends, Jeremy, on what type of podcast you're hoping to release. There's all different types of podcasts. I mean, to give you an idea, at the end of 2019, we only had about 700,000 podcasts on our platform. To date, we have 2.2 million. So that just goes to show you in the past 18 months, the exponential growth that's become podcasting. It's truly amazing. But whether you're doing like a scripted series or a non-scripted series or a talk show or just an interview format, such as you do with your podcast, I definitely think there's themes that need to be there. First and foremost, there needs to be a centralized theme and topic, right? I mean, people need to know that when they tune into the podcast, there's going to be consistency across episodes. You've done a great job of that with this podcast, focusing on EAs and leadership and growth and motivational speakers and development. People know when they tune into the Leader Assistant podcast, they're hopefully going to learn and grow as EAs. So that's critical. I think also just as important, a lot of people fail here, is there needs to be consistency on when the actual podcast is released. You'd be surprised how many people, it seems like everybody just wants to get into podcasting, but then they start out strong and then they kind of wean off. And so that's a surefire way to lose your audience. You have to have consistency when you're releasing episodes. And obviously you need to have a host that's authentic, that's relatable, that's humble, has great compassion for their guests, learns from their guests just as much as their guests provide information. It's a two-way street, right? And that's like what I like to call the magic sauce. So I think that, you have to have a host that really is authentic and cares about what the guest has to say and learns just as much from it. So that's just a rough idea.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, that's like a few really strong tips. I remember when I was doing some research before I launched mine, and I kind of discovered that consistency was one of the biggest things, and so I didn't want to launch mine until I knew that I could commit to publishing one episode every week at the same time. And
yes.
It's definitely worked out well. So
yeah, every Sunday we get a new episode. I love it.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about the assistant role a little bit. What would you tell someone who's about to start their first week as an assistant?
Oh my gosh. I mean, what I even tell myself back in the day when I started, but I mean, I would definitely say that if anything is consistent in the role of the EA is to expect the unexpected, to truly, I think, be successful in the role. You have to be flexible and adaptable at all times. I kind of like to think of myself as a chameleon, right? And I need to constantly be shifting gears and changing, my mindset at a moment's notice. So if you're someone that, likes extreme structure and doesn't like a lot of change and doesn't, and things can change at a moment's notice, this probably is not the role for you. What I also love about being an EA to that fact is that no one day is ever the same. I mean, and just when I think I have something down, it's going to change. Especially in tech, things are constantly changing at lightning speed. So I think definite one guarantee about being an EA is that things are constantly going to change. And that actually excites me. I talk to a lot of family members and friends, and they're always like, I would never in a million years want to do what you do. I have zero desire. Just hearing about it gives me massive anxiety, right? Mm-hmm. But I think that, for me, for some reason, I like the chaos. I just like to control it. And I would also stress the importance, really, this is critical too, of getting to know other EAs when you started a new job, just within that organization. If it's not already set up from you from HR during your onboarding process, make it a point to reach out to fellow EAs at the company and ask to meet with them, for 15 or 30 minutes, across different departments, and sit down. What works for you? What doesn't work for you? What's it like working here? You kind of just have to soak up as much information as possible. We are in many ways like sponges. So, be open to that and network. And, I always stress this when I talk to a lot of EAs. I'm fascinated by, they're so great at their jobs, but they could be so much better if they just make those connections, not only within their organizations, but externally as well. It's all about networking and connecting. And I've seen it time and time again when EAs that aren't on the forefront and on their executive eyes, obviously, but also within other leaders within the organization, that, when there's reorgs or things happen, they kind of fall by the wayside and they end up not getting a new role simply because they're not out front. And, you can't really sit on the back burner when you're an EA, you kind of have to make conscious effort to get out there and be seen and be heard.
So let's get a little more specific on a couple of tips. Do you have any game-changing tips for managing email or calendars?
Yeah. So when it comes to email and calendars, obviously staying organized is extremely important. When it comes to email, Jeremy, I tend to only have in my inbox any email that requires an action on my part within 24 hours. I receive on a typical day between 300 and 400 emails. Obviously, a good portion of those are replies or calendar invites, but it's super easy, at least for me anyway. I have done it in the past multiple times where I become extremely overwhelmed with the amount of emails that are coming in. And I sometimes have felt as though I was falling down this black hole with emails. So one thing I developed years ago is I started obviously creating, rules and sub filters to help filter messages come in to different categories. And what I recently started doing as well, and I think I've heard some other people talk about this on your podcast, is I actually just like within the last year started scheduling time to check emails. And that's helped me tremendously because I kind of always used to think that I needed to respond right away and get back within a certain amount of time. There was a lot of pressure. So I now schedule a solid hour every morning when I wake up to check my emails. And then I have a couple other 30-minute blocks throughout the day on my calendar to know to go in and check. So that's one way that I've definitely helped manage the email aspect. When it comes to calendars, I'm extremely visual. I always have been. So no matter what executive I've supported throughout my career, I've always color-coded everything. And so I know at a moment's glance at the calendar if something can be moved or cannot be moved. So meetings that are in, bright red for my boss or executive are meetings he or she has with their boss or the CEO. Those are just not touchable. Meetings in light green are with external clients and vendors, either conference calls or video calls. So I try not to move those because they're dealing with external people. Dark green is travel. There hasn't been a lot of that with the pandemic. But, if my executives in flight or, in transit in a car, those will be in dark green. Orange are internal meetings, so they have more flex. Light blue are status meetings with my executives direct, so I know I can easily move those. So it just kind of helps me when I glance at the calendar. I know what I can play Tetris with and what I can't. So that's worked really well for me.
So does he see these colors as well?
He does. And actually, when I started supporting my current executive, he actually brought that to my attention. He was like, wow, okay, I've never had this before. And then he's actually really started to enjoy it and is now taking it on. It's like, yeah, I can imagine without the colors. So it helps. It really does help. So it also works for him. He can look at the calendar and say, okay, I know at this time I've got a meeting with our CEO or my boss. So, it helps. And then obviously, scheduling in as well with calendars, breaks. I try to give my executive at least a 30-minute break every 3 hours to, grab something to eat or go to the bathroom or whatever, just being conscious of their time. And at the end of the week, I try to always schedule a 3 or 4 hour block of time for them to catch up on, anything that's happened that week or read decks for upcoming meetings, et cetera.
Yeah, my executive likes it too. He even suggested that, because I try not to do too many categories. But recently he's like, hey, could we add a color for this specific category? I think it was for like HR interviews, interviewing potential hires. And we hadn't had a ton of those because we're a smaller company and but we're kind of growing pretty quickly now. And so he's like, hey, can we go ahead and just do a color for that? That way he loves it so that because he can look at his calendar and say, oh, I've got an investor meeting today, I've got a sales meeting today, and I've got an interview today. So
it really helps. It really, really helps. So it's funny. I even do it with like my Pendaflexes. I don't print much, but I like certain colors I know are for certain things. So when I do on a rare occasion have to print a doc or whatever, and I know it's going to go in this color Pendaflex. So it just helps me stay on top of it all.
Yeah. Awesome. So how has your partnership with your executive changed during the global pandemic?
Great question. So interestingly enough, I started with my current executive in mid-April of this year. So my previous executive that I was supporting at Spotify decided at the beginning of March of 2020 to leave the organization and pursue another opportunity. So I'll kind of preface this by saying, as I talked about earlier, they were big on growth and development at Spotify. So I kind of was at, again, another crossroads and trying to figure out what my next role would be. So again, the importance of networking and knowing people within the organization. So I met with a bunch of different people and applied for a couple of different roles because actually there wasn't an executive assistant role open at the time. And I had several interviews and met with a lot of great people within the company, but I kind of, after a few weeks, was trying to, decide if I'm supposed to stay at Spotify or not. And I think the key message here is that a lot of times as assistants, we want to be in control of things, but sometimes when you surrender and you just put it out to the universe, something happens. And that's exactly what happened. So literally about 4 or 5 weeks in, which is great in and of itself, because they let me try to figure out what my next path would be at the company. My current executive's assistant sent out an email that she was going into another role in the organization. And so I immediately pinged her and said, "Hey, Jane, is Courtney looking for a new EA?" And she said, well, yes, he is, but he's based in Los Angeles and you're in New York. And I said, yeah, that's, we're all working remotely anyway. What's the difference at this point? So it just ended up working out. I knew Courtney previously. He had a lot of meetings with my former boss. And so we have not had any face-to-face interaction yet. It has all been virtual, to answer your question. And the whole company has been working from home since March and will continue to do so. We just announced recently that we're going to offer different options for employees moving forward, as a lot of companies, and especially in the tech space, are doing. But it's been working out really well. Me being based in New York, him in Los Angeles, our global headquarters are in Stockholm, Sweden. So I'm kind of in between, for him in LA, and, Stockholm's 6 hours ahead. I'm in New York, 3 hours ahead of him. He's in LA. So it actually is working out really, really well. And it's been a great, wonderful, positive experience. I'm thoroughly enjoying it and being part of the studios team.
That's awesome. Any quick tips for working remotely?
Again, going back to scheduling time for yourself, making it a point to, step away from the computer. I take at least 2 long walks each day. Obviously have my phone with me in case my executive needs to reach me for anything that's, super urgent. But I think that, it's been interesting. When we started all working from home, there was sort of like I don't know, if we're going to be able to make this work. And if anything, the company has grown significantly since last March. We just had one of our strongest quarters ever. So I think that, the way that we're all going to work, even post-pandemic, is going to change. I think organizations are realizing that, at the end of the day, as long as the work's getting done, it's getting done well. That's really, honestly, all that should matter. I don't think that, the days of going into an office and being chained to a desk 5 days a week, I think are pretty much forever going to be gone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And it's great. I mean, I'm sure for you as well, right? Were you ever able to work from home prior to the pandemic, or were you always in the office?
Yeah, I was able to do, for my last executive, my prior company, I was pretty much, I think towards the end, I was pretty much doing work from home 2 or 3 days a week. Mm-hmm. And then with my current executive before the pandemic, I would work in the office most of the time, but I would kind of give him a heads up and say, hey, I'm going to work from home Friday so that I can crank some stuff out. He was always flexible about that. But he was actually fairly anti-remote work, just because we were a startup, we were trying to figure things out, and he really liked the collaboration and brainstorming sessions with the whiteboard and all that. But with being forced to work from home, he's actually done a complete flip on his opinion, because he's like, wow, I'm able to like go for walks, to see my kids more, like I get more focused to deep work done. And he still misses the collaboration part, but I think the remote hybrid is definitely the future.
Yes, for sure. Yeah. And I don't know about for you, but I find myself so much more focused at home. At Spotify, our work areas were all open. No one had an office. So everyone was on the floor. So it could get loud at times. And I'm the type of person that really needs kind of like for things to be quiet when I hone in, especially in a particular project or a deck or something. I need to really be in it. So that could be difficult for me, but I definitely agree with you. I mean, I wouldn't mind seeing people a few times a year, and we're going to have that opportunity, which is great. But I find that I am just so much more productive at home than I ever was. And I just so much more focused, but it's nothing but positive for me.
Yeah, definitely. All right, Scott. Well, one of my favorite questions to ask is, what makes an assistant a leader?
Wow. I think that's a lot of things. I think that, great executive assistants who are great leaders are self-aware. They prioritize personal and professional development. Even more importantly, they focus developing others. And whether that's helping other assistants, they're obviously not only on the forefront of their executives, but again, I've said it before, everyone in the company from the mailroom to the CEO's office, they're seen, they're heard, they're validated. They don't hide in the shadows. I think just as important, they have a great business foresight and acumen for the business. They know what's going on with the business. They're able to connect the dots and properly prioritize tasks. They're self-aware and show great compassion and empathy for others. They're true team players. They don't lead with their egos. And I think, they take great pride in what they do. I'm really excited to see, especially with your podcast and your book and all the other different like support groups that are, starting to form on LinkedIn and Facebook, that, the role is now, I think, taking on a much different light. And it's very refreshing to see that we're moving away from being considered just the help, right? And I think that it's exciting to see. So, we may not always get the recognition that our executives do, but, we're comfortable with that, and we're the glue that holds everything together. So lots of things, I think, make assistants great leaders. But I think just most importantly, they help other people. And, we're in a role of service, right? So it's all about making things run more effectively and efficiently.
Well said, Scott. Well said. Mic drop.
Thanks.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for being on the show. Really excited to meet you in person someday, hopefully, and stay in touch. And how can people listening connect with you and reach out to you?
Sure. On LinkedIn is the best way. So I'm sure you'll link my profile in the show notes, but please reach out, drop me a line. I love connecting with other EAs all around the globe. We're all in this together. So it was great to finally have this chat, Jeremy, and nothing but the best to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott. Have a great one.
You too. Take care.
Please review on Apple Podcasts. GoBulls.com